So all of our panelists today are key stakeholders in the Nigerian food system space. And we are looking at two big contextual issues. Food insecurity and malnutrition have been with us as a country and have been with us at a very high level for way too long. And those words, malnutrition, food insecurity, they really don't need introduction to most Nigerians who are not normally hanging out around Transcorp Hilton, which is about 99% of us. So Nigerians who are unable to find nutritious foods in sufficient quantity to feed themselves at a price that they can afford know what it means to be food insecure. And now that has been compounded by COVID. So let me introduce my distinguished panelists before I jump straight into my first questions for them. And so I have with me this afternoon, Mrs. Ndidi Nwuneli, who is a managing partner, Sahel Consultants. I also have Mr. Fred Kafiro, who is the country representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Nigeria. And thirdly, I have Mrs. Mira Mehta, who is the CEO of Tomato Juice, so very much at the cold face of what we're talking about today. So you're welcome. My question for my panelists really is to ask you, from where you sit and your interests in how sufficient and nutritious foods get to the tables and plates of Nigerians, what is keeping you awake at night when you think about the current situation that we're in, which is one of food insecurity and malnutrition for too many Nigerians? And before I pose that question, I just want to put the question in a bit of context. It's true and it's clear that agriculture has been, if you like, the biggest target of this government's economic diversification program, both in terms of policy and strategy, but also in terms of fiscal measures. But even before COVID set in, we already had quite a lot of difficulties. A disappointing 2% annual growth rate in the agricultural sector since 2017, which is barely matching the population growth rate, which it needs to outpace if we're going to have more food and sufficient food for people, and also even begin to think about becoming a food exporting nation. We see food price inflation on a continuous upward trend with National Bureau of Statistics data showing a deterioration from an increase of 13.4% year on year in July 2019, which is well before COVID, to 17.4% in October 2020. Nigeria was already assessed in 2019 to have half of the total numbers of the food insecure population of West Africa. And National Bureau of Statistics estimates of Nigerians living in poverty, fantastic. Living in poverty in 2019 stood at nearly 83 million, which, when combined with food price inflation, paints a very scary picture for millions of Nigerians. We're already losing a lot of the foods that we produce, fruits and vegetables, in some cases up to 40%, due to post-harvest inefficiencies and lack of infrastructure, which means, again, higher prices for what is left. We have 37% of our children under 5 who are stunted, so too short for their age, due to malnutrition. And 1 in 5 children born underweight, which is an indicator of the health status of their mothers. Now, our poor diets is the biggest single contributor to illness and death for Nigerians. This is what we see. And on top of all of this, COVID-19 came along and moved very, very quickly from being a health system challenge to an acute and severe shock to our food systems, on top of insecurity that was already affecting production on top of some of the problems we're having with climate. And we saw that in reductions in agricultural production. We saw that in the slowing down, in the impact on supply chains, which faced a lot of disruption because of the lockdowns and the other measures that were put in place to try and manage the health pandemic. And what we have seen is that COVID itself has actually erased years of progress that we've all made in terms of nutrition in the 9-10 months or so that we've been trying to deal with this. So I've said all of this to be able to come back to my question from earlier. And before I pose that question again and go to my panel, I am really pleased to be able to announce that we now have the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Honorable Minister Alhaji Mohammed Sabo Nanono, who is now joined us. You're welcome, sir. And I think I'm tempted to go first to one of the ladies on the panel, but I think I will come to the Honorable Minister to kick us off. And the question, Honorable Minister, is from where you sit, given the picture that I've just painted, which is what we see, from where you sit and your interest in how sufficient, diverse, and nutritious foods gets to the tables and plates of Nigerians, what is keeping you awake at night? And when you think about all of these statistics or figures, what, in your view, are the underlying causes of the picture that I've just painted, which is what, like I said, what we're seeing? What's behind this problem? It's important, I think, to understand how we see this problem from the different perspectives first. So, Honorable Minister, you have the floor, sir.
Tell him to come again. Please, can you come again?
Okay. Just to repeat the question, I've painted a picture of what we're seeing in terms of food insecurity, malnutrition, and impacts on the ground. And I just wanted to hear from you, Honorable Minister, from where you sit, given your interest in how sufficient, diverse, and nutritious foods gets to the tables and plates of Nigerians. What is keeping you awake at night when you think about all of these statistics that I've just given out? What are the underlying causes, from your perspective, of the food insecurity and the malnutrition that we are seeing the impacts of in terms of the population of the country that we're in?
Oh, well, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think it is important to state the facts. One, we have a population of probably over 200 million, and it's been projected that in the next 3 or 4 decades, we may reach 400 million. Then the question is, do we have the resource base and turn this resource base into a developmental base for the development in the agricultural sector? Yes, we have the resource base. We have the land. We have approximately between 84 to 92 million hectares of cultivatable land. But as of today, we are only cultivating about 34 million hectares. And even this 34 million hectares is not at its optimum level. Then where are the challenges here? And this comes to the issue of answering your own question. There is low productivity in the agricultural sector. And the reason being that we are, in terms of modern agricultural farming, we are too far below the acceptable level. For example, The agricultural mechanization in this country is just about 7 tractors per 100 square kilometers. And the standard average is about 127 tractors per square kilometers. Is most of the developing countries is about 1,200 tractors per 100 square kilometers. In China, which is in Kenya, which is in African countries, is about 27 tractors per 100 square kilometers. If we are to reach Kenya, we need about 60,000 tractors into this country. So the low level of productivity arises from absolutely low penetration of mechanization in the agricultural sector. So if we are going to produce food to eat and to make our population happy, we need to mechanize. We need to modernize agriculture. The average tonnage per hectare in this country across the board is between 1.2 to 1.6 ton per hectare. In relatively mechanized countries, it's ranging between 8 to 10 tons per hectare. So we have a long way to go. If we are going to seriously address the issue of food security, agricultural mechanization is the core of the issue. What the government is doing about? Over the last 3-4 years, the government.
I will come back to you, Honorable Minister.
Okay.
Of the, what are the key actions that are maybe ongoing currently or that we need to really focus on? But thank you very much for that. I think there's a really strong point that has come out of that submission, which is the productivity of our agricultural system is a key question. Can I ask the same question to Mrs. Ndidi Umuneli? What is keeping you awake at night? What do you see as the underlying problems that has led us to where we are currently, where we're food insecure and there's malnutrition is a big problem for us in the country?
Thank you very much for the question, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. As a Nigerian, what keeps me up at night is the cost of food and the challenges with availability and affordability of nutritious food. 57% of household income is spent on food in Nigeria. This is the highest in the world. And unfortunately, COVID and all the challenges in 2020, this rate is rising. In fact, 57% of households cannot afford healthy food. And unless we do something about it, we're creating not just the challenge to this generation, but to future generations. Because when children are malnourished, when children are stunted, it affects brain development, it limits their outcomes. And when I look at what is going on, I think the biggest burden and challenge we face is that we've looked at this sector as a sector focused on production. And unfortunately, it's not enough to look at production. We have to look at from farm to fork. So we're not doing enough around processing, around stopping post-harvest losses, around investing in innovation, around local sourcing, around providing catalytic financing. And this is making our entire ecosystem uncompetitive. And unless we urgently do something about it, we're going to see even more challenges in future linked to climate change and linked to our growing population. And when people are hungry, we call it they're hungry. They're hungry and they're angry. And when people are hungry, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen, not only in our rural communities, but in our cities. So this is what keeps me up at night.
Thank you so much, Ndidi. I think, again, I really like this really strong key point coming through, which is too much of a focus on the production end, not sufficient focus through the supply chain, and through towards the downstream end of the agriculture value chain. So I'm going to pose the same question to Mrs. Mita from the perspective of somebody who is actually right in the midst of it, at the cold face of trying to make the system work and producing and getting foods on the market. What do you see as the underlying issue behind what we're seeing in terms of the data and the figures and the performance of the agricultural system?
Well, first of all, thank you again for having me here at this panel. I'd like to observe all protocols. Honorable Minister, it's a pleasure. And to all my other esteemed panelists. I draw a lot of inspiration from Ndidi, so it's no surprise that her statement of what keeps her up at night very much mirrors my own. But I think what I would like to do is just relate an example at the individual farmer level of how this lack of productivity really plays out and why it leads into this cycle of poverty that is so hard to break. So, I live in Kaduna. We work with a lot of dry season and rainy season smallholder farmers. And the average farmer, let's talk about an average dry season farmer. They have maybe half a hectare of land because again, in the dry season, you have to irrigate that land. It's a little bit more expensive to farm. And typically when a farmer is deciding what crop to plant, they look at the previous season's highest prices. So if onions were really expensive in the previous season, the farmer would likely go for onions. If pepe was expensive, they'll go for pepe. If tomato was expensive, they'll go for tomato. And that means when all of the farmers are looking at the past season, they end up crashing the next year's price because so many of them are going into the same thing because they don't have a guarantee of who they're going to sell to. The second issue is, of course, around the ability to purchase inputs and the ability to use up-to-date technologies and to be willing to try new technologies. A lot of farmers, especially in the northern part of the country, don't have strong formal educations and haven't necessarily learned best practices outside of what they've been learning intergenerationally through their families. And there are a lot of improvements to technology and farming that have taken place in other parts of the world, but they're really not reaching a lot of these farmers. And then the third challenge is, of course, the market. A lot of farmers try to time the market. They want to sell when the price is going to be high, but they don't know when the price is going to be high. And what that ends up doing is if you're farming, let's say tomatoes, for example, you might plant earlier than you should, and you might hit an early rainstorm, or you might plant later than you should, and you might face really big challenges with heat, and your yield will drop. And then, if you're getting a very low yield and you're getting a very uncertain price in the market, you don't have an incentive to invest. Even if you have the money, you don't want to spend money on seed. You don't want to spend money on fertilizer because you cannot understand or control the risks that agriculture inherently has. And until you can break that cycle, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on in the session, it's really, really tough to convince any farmer, any rational farmer, to spend money on agriculture because they just don't see the upside.
Thank you very much, Mira, for that. I think, again, there's a strong theme coming through that for me, which is, inputs, technology, good agricultural practice, markets, and all of this is really dependent on not having the right kind of data, the right information, the right feedback into the system, the right support, and so on. And I think, we're beginning to really unearth some of the issues that I hope we'll be able to provide some solutions to as we go forward. So thank you very much for that. The question to my last panelist, same question, Mr. Fred Kafiro. You represent the FAO, and you've been in the country, I hope long enough to have started to really get a sense of where things are in terms of food and agricultural production. Just looking at where we are and looking and kind of reflecting on your experiences from other parts of the world, what are you seeing as some of these issues and big problems that is underlying what we're seeing in terms of results?
Thanks a lot. Let me also say that I'm privileged to be on this panel, and certainly also to thank the organizers for this important theme of building partnerships for resilience, because I think this is very important. Even we at FAO, together with our partners, the WFP and IFAD, as having a global mandate to help countries eliminate hunger, food insecurity and malnutrition, we know that to effectively address the complex causes and cross-sectoral nature of hunger and malnutrition, we need this multidisciplinarity and multi-stakeholder partnerships. And I'm glad that this panel represents this kind of wider partnerships. But back to your question, the issues that are pertaining here from my few months that I've been here are not unique to Nigeria. They are unique. They are available. They are the same pertaining issues in many developing countries, particularly in Africa. But this country is unique because of its large number of population. And if you ask me what keeps me awake, I will tell you that the population of this country needs to be fed. And it's not only now, but for the future, because it's increasing. So the issues that the Honorable Minister raised about increasing production and productivity, for me, besides the mechanization part of it, I would add, irrigation, I would add the sustainable farming approaches that need to actually be introduced, the improved seeds or breeds, if it's livestock, or fingerlings, if we're talking about fisheries, but also dealing with the inefficiencies that lead to food losses and food waste. Because FAO has made actually a report that shows that the world, from what is being produced, the world should be having enough food to feed everybody. But we lose a lot of it through inefficiencies, and this needs to be addressed. But moderator, you asked also about the issue of nutrition and malnutrition as a challenge. I see that as a big challenge, definitely. One thing we need to add here is the fact that the diets are changing. We have now an increased move from rural areas to urban areas. So many people have also changed their diets. They have started eating more meat, drinking more milk. These kinds of changes also need to be matched with the necessary infrastructure for transportation of food, for example, from rural areas into the urban areas, but also the rural infrastructure that deals with the fact that we are able to store whatever we produce before we are able to move it, whether it's cold storage facilities, whether it's a road network in rural areas that is able to move farmers' produce from one end to another in order to reach eventually the market in the cities. All this needs to be addressed. But also one of the panelists mentioned about the importance of processing and therefore the infrastructure with regard to electricity. Now, for us as FAO, we also deal with a range of other areas. For example, we deal with pests that come from other countries. And this is, by the way, a big challenge, not only here in Nigeria, but in many of the countries in West Africa, where we have transboundary diseases and pests, which in fact affect crops and animals, and therefore impacting on food security. This is very important. And we talk about partnerships here. Research comes in very, very handy. I don't want to go on and on, but the challenges, as I said, still relate to other African countries.
Thank you, and there will be an opportunity to really go back into some of this and begin to really think about how do we change this narrative. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Kafiro. Honorable Minister, I'm going to come back to you, and I really want to thank you for raising the issue about the population growth that has been projected for Nigeria. We have 200 million of us. In 20 years, we're estimated to be needing to feed about 400 million. And before you joined us, I did mention that we know that there's been a lot of government investment going towards agriculture because it's been a focus of government for moving us away from an oil-based economy. But we see that you know, there's still real gaps in funding for critical infrastructure, for some of the inputs, like you rightly mentioned, for mechanization, and, you know, for some of the really hard infrastructure that's required to really get the system working properly. I want to come back to you now, because you were just about to begin to tell us what is going on currently within government to address some of this. And also, I hope some of the other things that you have in mind in terms of how we address some of these issues, especially around critical infrastructure and what I might term as, you know, strategic inputs. Mr. Kafiro talked about electrification and some other things, which really gets us to the scale of production that we need as a country. So, Honorable Minister, what is the government doing to move us beyond a 2% year-on-year increase in terms of agricultural productivity, so that we're beginning to match the population growth that we see projected, excuse me, for Nigeria? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think in the first place, we are embarking as a first step a major agricultural mechanization in the country, which will cover roughly about 632 local governments under the Green Imperative, an agreement signed between the federal government of Nigeria and the Brazilian government, of which fund for that purpose has already been sourced. Everything has been completed. What we are waiting for is the approval of the National Assembly, which we hope will be done within the next 4 weeks or thereabout. This program, as I said earlier, will cover about 632 local government. Coupled with that is agro-processing centers clustering local government with similar commodities. And there will be, within these clusters of local government, processing centers for common commodities that they produce in these areas. These service centers are going to be private sector driven. The only role the government will play is to guarantee the loan facility. And in the service center, you will have a tractor hiring scheme, you will have an IT and management office, you will have a workshop, and you will have a storage. And they will have a working capital with full complements of good seed, fertilizer, and the pesticides. Our estimate is the investment in the service centers by the private sector may be in the region of 10 million or thereabout, but you will be handed over an asset worth over 150 million. And all the trucks will have a tracking system. Wherever your tractor is working, you will know the amount of work it is doing, the amount of money it is getting. And from the experience as a farmer, and every tractor in this country makes between 60 to 70,000 naira per day. And you can net off between 30 and 35,000 naira per day. We made an estimate that you can pay this loan within the next 10 years or even less, because an average life of tractor well maintained is about 25 years. So this is a low-hanging fruit for farmers. And we have organized ourselves towards dissemination of information. I think by next month or thereabout, program of implementation will come out and we will start sensitization all the country. That is one step we are taking. The other step that we are taking, which has been a very difficult problem of this country and over the years has been a disaster, is the production, management, and distribution of fertilizer. Luckily enough for us now, we have about between 32 to 34 blending plants that are blending NPK fertilizer of various dimensions. On top of that, There's a lot of private sector investment now in the fertilizer industry sector. And some of them are coming with even a modern extension service. For example, the Dangote Fertilizer Company is going to start rolling out urea to the tune of 3 million tons per annum. And then they will have an MPK line. And in their own case, they are not only selling fertilizer to you, they are selling fertilizer with a difference. It will come with an extension service, determining the type of soil you have and the type of fertilizer you need. And they will deliver fertilizer to you like the way they in Jigawa State. So when you add up all this, I believe we will be comfortable with regard to fertilizer availability and distribution in this country. The role of my ministry will then be just three: quality control, price, and distribution. And all these this magu with regard to fertilizer will go on for good. And we will be relieved of that responsibility as Ministry of Agriculture. That is one. That is number two. Number three, there is also an element of development in research for good seeds for our agricultural sector. Our research institutions have been underfunded for a long, long time. In fact, it is amazing that we pay a professor about 500,000 naira per month, and he has no 200,000 for research. This is bad. We are trying to turn that table and to make sure that we fund our research institutions to enable them to research. You can't develop agriculture without research. The other element is with regard to livestock development. A lot of noise has been done in that regard. Now, we are creating a model for livestock development. And I'm happy that the private sector is taking initiative also in this direction. For example, WAPCO, the producers of fig millet, they have now galvanized the Fulani farmers around Ogun, Oyo, and Osu. They are improving their cattle genetically, they are improving their milk production, they are improving their pastures. And they are moving to Niger State where they will acquire something in the region of 10,000. There are some people that we are discussing with them that I will invest billions into the livestock industry. So this noise of farmer crisis in the next 5 years, probably it will be a thing of the past. And this has to be also coupled with the education, to educate both the farmers and the herders that the situation has changed. Major demographic changes have happened over the last 30 years in this country. The Fulani man has to understand that probably quality is better than quantity. And that you will understand that only through education and demonstration. That he doesn't need to go around. He can make whatever money he wants to make, probably by controlling a number of cattle and feeding them well. In this country, we require about 5 million liters per day of milk. It is being estimated that we have about 25 million cows in this country. If you can set aside 5 million to give you 1 liter per day, you are home and dry. Then the major issue is logistics. How do you get this milk collected? We have started a process in the ministry.
I'm going to interrupt you, but I mean I know you're speaking because when we met, I could feel your passion coming from the perspective of a farmer yourself. So I know if I give you the floor for the next 1 hour, you will reel out a whole range of things, and some of these things that you're talking about are really exciting to hear. But I'm going to give you another couple of minutes because my challenge back to you, sir, is we're still talking a lot about production. And there was a couple of comments about we need to be thinking about the partnerships that are required within government to invest right through the chain, to retail, to marketing. So how is the Ministry of Agriculture working with the Ministry of Trade or, other parts of government to ensure that this production actually feeds into a system that gets the food on people's tables rather than end up wasted, like we see quite a bit of our production going to waste?
Yeah, as it has been pointed out, we lose probably about 40% in post-harvest losses. And tell you frankly, also over the years, we have neglected those arms that will create a sustainable value chain between the agricultural sector and the industrial sector. It's the micro level. We're not doing badly. We have a lot of processing companies coming up across the board, some being funded and assisted by donor agencies like IBAN, FAO, and several other donor agencies. We have a common platform between Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Trade and Industry on agricultural processing facilities. We have now trying to streamline the financing in the agricultural sector, which is also very crucial because central bank is involved heavily in the financing of agricultural sector. But the major financial institution for that is Bank of Agriculture, which are in the process of reorganizing it and refocusing it on how to go about doing their own business. That is there. But the issue is this, and I have been telling this for quite some time. We have large number of unemployed youth, and you can produce the food to feed everybody in this country, but some people will remain hungry. The reason is simple. They have no gainful employment. Absolutely. So they don't have the money to buy the food, even when the food is available. And how do we address that? And this is a challenge for us, the private sector, and even the other foreign countries that are coming into this country. You have to create a strong synergy between the agricultural sector and the industrial sector so that you can move this large number of unemployed people into gainful employment. Remember, we lost over 145 textile mills in this country, plus other agro-processing industry in this country. And this is the beginning of our problem with regard to employment of our youth. This has to be a challenge to Nigerians, government and the private sector. And to be honest with you, we have to have that political will to push this ahead. Otherwise, all what we are talking about is not going to clean up this large number of youth on our streets.
Let me thank you very much, Honorable Minister, and I really appreciate the challenge that you put towards the private sector. Now I'm going to go to the private sector, and I will be asking Mrs. Nwuneli first. You've heard from the Honorable Minister. Government is investing. There's a lot of movement around the production end. There, a number of common platforms that they are trying to build to connect production with trade and financing and so on. I guess my question really is the private sector seeing this? How is this landing with the private sector? And what does the private sector actually need from government? There was just a point there made by the Honorable Minister. Our young people, largest demographic in the country, what are the opportunities that the private sector would like to see in terms of rewarding innovation and technology, especially in a way that helps to catalyze youth entrepreneurship and help us to bring forward some really new solutions to all of these challenges that we have been facing with our food system and continue to face. Mrs. Omuneli.
Thank you so much. And I just want to preface my comments by suggesting that I wear a number of hats. So I'm the co-founder of Ace Foods, which is an agro-processing company, managing partner of Sahel Consulting, which turns 10 tomorrow. And we've been working in the dairy, seed systems, cassava, yam, with lots of private sector companies. We're the ones managing the Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria project, and before that, the Nigeria Dairy Development Program, which the Honorable Minister alluded to, working with many of the companies he alluded to. And more recently, the chair and founder of Nourishing Africa, which is a platform for entrepreneurs across the continent engaged in the African agriculture landscape. And I just want to preface that because I'm coming at this from an actor in the ecosystem, but also someone who works with a lot of actors. And through the last 4 months, under the umbrella of the NESG, I've been coordinating the technical working group on Vision 2050, Vision 2026 for the agriculture, food security, and rural development. And from those voices, not just my voice, a couple of messages around what the government is doing. I think if we ask the private sector, and we did, we had focus group discussions, a lot of private sector organizations recognize that the government has noted how important agriculture and food security is. But we continue to see a mismatch between the policy agenda, the funding of that policy agenda, and the support and enabling environment for private sector to thrive. And I'll give you a few issues that have come up. Infrastructure is one big issue. You cannot engage in agriculture, food processing, logistics, cold chain without good roads and feeder roads. The cost of transporting food in Nigeria is too high. In fact, it's cheaper to bring in a container from the UK of potatoes than to transport tomato from Kano to Lagos. The number of days, the waste, infrastructure is one huge opportunity for the government to take a hold of. Energy is another one. Extension support, and I think Mira referred to this. We still have one extension worker to 8,000 farmers. Security has come up as a huge issue. Many of our food companies and farmers, small scale, large scale, medium scale, are threatened on a daily basis because of insecurity that is affecting their production. In fact, many of our farmers have to hire security guards to guard their farms. And the final, but most important, is the policy landscape. And there's still a lot of challenge around policy. Seamless, streamlined policy that's consistent, that is unfortunately committed to. Let me give you an example. I work in dairy. We work in dairy in 5 states in Nigeria. And the Ministry of Agriculture has a dairy initiative. The CBN has a dairy initiative. The Ministry of Trade and Investment has a dairy initiative. And the presidency has a dairy initiative. And as Aldine, the Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria, we're working with all agencies. There's CODERAN, which is the National Association of Ranchers. And so we're trying to bring these organizations together through a common voice at the state level and at the federal level. And you see this in almost every single value chain. I can say the same about rice. I can say the same about yam, cassava, maize, and that opportunity to work as ecosystem actors to create seamless policy is critical. The Honorable Minister talked about research institutions, and I completely agree with him. They are so vital. They have to create demand-driven research. Every research institution in Nigeria, we have close to 30, should have a private sector advisory board that's creating research that meets our needs so that they're fixing problems that affect us, and that every single day, every cent that comes into those research institutions actually comes back to improve our operations, improve our engagement, enhance our productivity and profitability. And guess what? The private sector will fund these research institutions, and they don't need to depend on government. We've seen this in Cote d'Ivoire, we've seen this in South Africa, we've seen this in Australia. It is possible if it is demand-driven. And the final policy change that I want to advocate is a revamping of agribusiness education. We have close to 20 agriculture institutions in Nigeria, higher level institutions around universities. And unfortunately, they're still teaching agriculture as a science. Most of these students graduate and they cannot help the sector. So one of the biggest barriers to our growth in this ecosystem is talent. We need to revamp our entire agriculture curriculum. And we've engaged with professors and they're ready for this, but we need NUC, we need the Ministry of Agriculture, we need them to partner with private sector to revamp the sector, to revamp the educational institutions, and to ensure that it's demand-driven, that they're mentored, that they have internships, and that they're ready to come and join our companies. Mira can tell you how often we ask each other for help with finding staff who are capable, competent, and ready to work. And this is a huge policy issue. And the private sector is ready and available to work with government to address many of these challenges. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you very much, Ndidi. But before I let you go, I really want to drill down on this issue about engaging our youth. I know in what you've just said, there's elements of that within your response. But you know, we do have this demographic opportunity, but we've seen with recent events that if it's not managed properly, then it could become a demographic time bomb that we're sitting on. But yet, you know, we're looking for increasing numbers of people engaged in agriculture. Our young people are moving away from rural communities into urban areas, looking for what in their minds is more sustainable, more kind of rewarding employment. How can we make agriculture more connected to the aspirations of our young people from your work and experience?
So I think this is one sector that can create millions and millions of jobs right now in our country. But I would like us to move away from thinking of agriculture as primary production. We have to think about the food ecosystem. Let's change our language. Michael, the first step is calling it the food ecosystem. Now, young people can have jobs across the board. Vocational institutions can actually create programs to train these young people for 6 months to be extension workers using cell phones to collect data. Data is a huge challenge in our sector. Mira talked about data. All of our young people can become extension workers. From one extension worker to 8,000 farmers, we should get to the FAO target of one extension worker to 400 farmers. So there's already an opportunity to train all our young people to be extension workers. There's an opportunity to train them to be factory workers, to be processors, to be logistics providers. Across the board, there are opportunities for young people, leveraging innovation and technology. No young person wants to go to the farm with a hoe and cutlass. And that's the picture we've painted around agriculture and opportunities in our country. And that is not the reality today. And so if we revamp the way we talk about this sector, the way we think about this sector, and open up opportunities for young people to become workers in the ecosystem and entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, we'll see a massive opportunity. I'll just tell you what we're doing with our Aldine program as an example. With Aldine, we're helping young people become feed and fodder entrepreneurs. They're growing feed in using technology. Our young people are becoming extension workers. They're training our nomadic households, leveraging technology and innovation. On a daily basis, they're sending cell phone data to us using their cell phones, uploading that data to a portal. They're community workers, they're livestock workers, they're aggregators. They're actually manning the milk collection centers, and they're becoming vet doctors and vet assistants. And we're training and unlocking entire ecosystems around factories that buy this milk on a daily basis. And in one sector, dairy, which the minister talked about, we can create so many jobs. The same models can be replicated across the board. And it means we have to invest in backward integration and create a policy environment that compels companies to source locally, compels governments to buy nutritious food sourced locally. I would advocate for a 50% local sourcing strategy where we're buying proudly Nigerian food. And not only from companies like Tomato Juice, which are amazing, but from so many companies run by young people across our country.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that, Ndidi. I didn't try to summarize the Honorable Minister's submission. I won't try to summarize yours. I think there's a lot in there. And I hope that we can bring it together as a kind of thread of key points towards the end of this. So I want to ask the same question. I see the Honorable Minister wants. I will bring you back in, sir.
Okay.
But can I just can I ask a similar question to Mira, because what would have been really interesting to hear about is the sub-national perspective from a state level. But you work in partnership with state government, and there are opportunities or connections that happen on a national scale. But we know that, our states and state governments have a critical role to play in how the local food systems actually work. And it would be really interesting to hear your perspective on the same question I've just been asking of Indy. What are you getting from state level government in terms of support to the private sector? What do you need that you're not getting? And how are you able to really engage our young people in the food system, the system that produces, that processes, that transports, that delivers these foods to markets and to retail and to plates? How do you see the opportunities for young people, especially given where you sit and where you play?
So I will start by saying that as a member of the private sector, I have a view on government that, is a bit limited in terms of, I couldn't agree more with Dr. Fred about the importance of infrastructure. Every single country that produces agricultural exports or large-scale agricultural products, and that where that is a driving force in our economy, has good infrastructure. One of the reasons that I moved to Kaduna, we're named Tomato Jos, but we're in Kaduna. One of the big reasons was because we were able to get better infrastructure. The state government took us around when we were looking for land to over 20 different locations within the state. And one thing that was critical for me was access to roads. How am I going to move my product? And the second major thing that I was looking at was water. How am I going to irrigate? So it's just absolutely critical that you work in an environment. And enabling environment sounds like, all this big English, but really, for me anyway, it's having roads, having connectivity. If I'm in the farm somewhere and my staff is trying to reach me and there's no network, it's very inefficient to spend an hour searching for somebody to tell them, hey, somebody's here to see you, right? These are very, very basic things, very, very basic building blocks, but they're absolutely essential. Another reason why infrastructure is so important, we have tractors. The Honorable Minister mentioned mechanization, and we farm with mechanized, tractors, and we also work with our smallholder farmers to provide them with tractor services. But, we are in a country where if our John Deere tractor goes down, unfortunately, the licensed dealer for John Deere took 6 months to replace a fuse, where if I had been farming in the US, it would have been a 3-hour job to get a dealer to come out, replace the part, and the tractor will be back up and running. So these very, very basic problems end up having huge, huge challenges as you actually try to play out a large scale agricultural business, even one that works with smallholder farmers. To the point of youth involvement, I think Ndidi hit the nail on the head when she spoke about the importance of revamping education. And, you talked about, Ndidi, the idea of, the farmer, the image of the farmer as somebody going to the farm with a hoe and cutlass. And, right now, that is the reality for a lot of farmers. But I see, and this is maybe controversial, but I see, again, when I look at successful agricultural economies across the world, there has been some level of aggregation of land. And that doesn't mean necessarily a foreigner like me coming in and stealing all the land. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you're trying to get 10 million farmers to farm half a hectare of land and you want them to keep farming half a hectare of land 10 years from now, to me, that's not growth. You want to identify the 1 million farmers that really want to do farming as their primary business and help enable them to get to 5 hectares, 10 hectares, so that there are small scale commercial farmers. That is a much more attractive business for a young person to want to come in and manage. And when you do that kind of small scale aggregation, you do open up the door, like Ndidi said, to many types of agricultural support services. You have now people who need tractor service and then tractor service that can thrive. You have people who have to do their own weeding or to do their own chemical applications. And so you open the door for a chemical crew. There's a company that says, hey, I specialize in chemical applications, you know, for pesticide treatments, and I can come to your farm. I can be there tomorrow. I can spray your whole farm. That can now be a business. And so I think that as we think about all of these things, it's really important to keep that in mind about how the landscape needs to change.
Thank you very much, Mira. And I'll come back hopefully with maybe just a minute each to really just kind of pull out the kind of 1, 2, or 3 key actions that we want to ensure that gets in the community that we take with our policymakers on this. I promised I will go back to the Honorable Minister, but before I do that, I just want to ask Mr. Kafiro. So in October 2021, the UN Secretary General will convene a food systems summit to raise global awareness and secure global commitments and actions to help us to transform our food systems so that it can help us tackle not just hunger, but also reduce diet-related disease. And I know that you started talking about this because we haven't really given sufficient coverage to nutrition in our conversation today. But the summit will call for collective action from all citizens to really rethink the way that we produce, the way that we process, the way that we consume food. And I'm hoping that this eventually translates into a once-in-a-generation set of actions or effort to really transform our food systems, make it work for food, make it work for nutrition for our people. Nigeria is a key stakeholder. You know, we produce a lot of food. We have a large number of people. What do you think Nigeria should be doing to position itself to be a key player as we move towards the Food Systems Summit in 2021 to prepare ourselves, but also to be able to take advantage of what this represents going forward? Mr. Kafiro.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me congratulate all the panelists. I think that there's quite a lot of rich discussions and insights that all of them have presented. And in fact, this grounds the discussions that we shall be having around the UN Food Systems Summit. You see, that summit is in the context of the 2030 agenda, where member states, and there are many partners, and here, of course, we are talking about the partnerships that this particular summit that we are now in is actually emphasizing. So we've had a lot of our colleagues from the private sector and the wonderful things that they're doing out there. We've heard from the government, and the minister has told us what actually the government is doing with regard to increasing food security and nutrition in this country. We have not had other opportunities, but still we see the role of research in this case, and what they are doing in terms of breeding, in terms of coming up with the technologies that can be able to surmount the challenges of food insecurity. We have the academia, we have talked about that as well. So essentially, the ambition of this summit is to bring us all together on a collective journey for transforming the food systems. I think it was Didi who was talking about the importance of looking at all this as a food environment. So we're talking about actually the food system, ecosystem. It's very, very important that we look at all that we do all the way from production, from the farmer or fisherman or local herder, all the way to the consumers, and all those processes and actions that take place for ensuring food security and nutrition. It shows that everybody has a role. And for Nigeria, definitely, with all that I have heard and I've seen so far, and I've visited a few places. In fact, last week I was visiting much of the research institutions that we have in Ibadan and also in Lagos. And I saw the good things that are happening in this country that are not known anywhere else. I've heard from the private sector, and this is a country where private sector is playing a key role in all aspects of agriculture. And I'm glad that actually the force of private sector here is very, very strong. So how nice it would be that we all come together to dialogue about these issues. And this is a good starting point, Mr. Moderator, because ideally that's what we are all aiming to do virtually in March of the beginning of next year, to have these dialogues going and for Nigeria to come up with certain positions that then we can take at the global stage and say, look, this is Nigeria for you, if you're talking about dealing with hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition. And these are our ideas that can create meaningful impact globally and for other countries to come and learn from us. So it's a good opportunity that we need to take advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kafiro, for that. The Food System Summit is a critical staging post, and Nigeria should be a key player. I'm going to go back to the Honorable Minister, and thank you for your patience, sir. I suspect you wanted to react to a couple of things that have been said, but as you do, I also have a question from our audience for you, which is really about how the ministry is working on, in some cases reviving, in other cases improving our agricultural extension services. This has been raised as a big gap, which really is really critical to our smallholder farming community. So as you make your, at this, just a response, before I come to the very final contributions from everybody very quickly, what's the ministry doing about really expanding and improving agriculture extension services? And can I please ask all the panelists to put their videos on as the Honorable Minister is making his contribution? I think we want to have a screenshot of everybody. So over to you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I think let me answer the issue of this extension service. It's it's agreed. This is an area that we have a lot of laps in the agricultural sector, and we are embarking on training extension workers in the region of about 75,000 in the next 2 years. Already we have trained a little over 30,000, and we hope that we will achieve what we want within the next 2 years. But that is not even enough. We have to go further, but at least as a past step, we are doing this, and it's deliberate that we have to, and we are even training extension workers with a difference, not only salaried extension workers, but also extension workers that will also become farmers in the future. That's what we are doing now. Secondly, these two young ladies, I will crave on your intelligence that I would like to have a one-to-one discussion with them on these issues. There is some fundamental issues which I think are beyond this forum. And I think if they will do me a favor, we can arrange for a meeting to discuss some of the issues they raise. Probably we will be on the same page. The other thing is with regard to infrastructure. Everybody has been talking about it. But let me tell you, we lost our bearing since we allow our railway system to collapse. For a country like Nigeria, with large population, with large agricultural potential, everybody knows that you cannot achieve meaningful agricultural production, reduce post-harvest losses without a good railway system. If the white men over 100 years ago were sort of building a railway system from Lagos to Unguru, who are we to just look the other way with regard to our railway system? I am glad that the government now is pushing towards the resuscitation of the railway system. Once the railway system is in place, our cost profile across the board will change as far as the agriculture sector is concerned. That is number one. Number two, related to the issue of infrastructure. So far, we have done over 300 kilometers of rural roads. We are in negotiation with some of the private companies to do probably additional 400 kilometers in the next year. And we will be continuing building up on that. So we are addressing that issue of infrastructure. The other issue is with regard to database.
I will just give you 30 more seconds, Honorable Minister, to run.
Thank you very much. I want to inform you that as of today, we have registered 5.1 million farmers, and each farmer tied to his farm digitally, from his state to his local government, to his ward, to his farm, digital ID, to BVN, and to national ID card. We have that complete of 5.1 million farmers registered. And there is an important database, agricultural database for this country. And I think this is one issue that many people that are coming to invest in agriculture, they will look for. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much, sir. And I think we've got a couple more minutes before the end, and I'm really keen to keep my promise of coming round to all of the panelists. I think the Honorable Minister has just spoken. My other three panelists, to really just hear from you, if you want to leave us with 2 or 3 key actions that we need to really focus on, what would those 2 or 3 key actions be? And I'll come to Mira first. What would be from your perspective, having had this conversation, what would be your 2 or 3 key actions for us to?
Well, I think that if it depends on who you're asking to take action, right? But if I'm looking at other potential private sector businesses, and then my advice and my actions are, study the market. And this is also for young people. There are a number of young entrepreneurs, even here in Kaduna, that I'm so impressed by, people who just make coconut oil or honey or, small, you would call them quasi cottage industry businesses. And I think that, this is another way to spur employment within the whole the eco food system. Or maybe I don't know if I got that phrase right, but I think that my advice for people who want to get into agriculture is to study the market, to study what product it is that you want to make and how many people really want to buy that product, right? Because at the end of the day, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to understand who actually wants what you can make. And then the second piece of advice related to that is, get started on your side hustle while you still have an income, if you have an income, because you will learn so much more by doing than you will by desk research. And you will also learn more by doing your own research than if you hire somebody else to do the research for you. So, if for those in the audience who are joined this panel because they had an interest in agriculture and agribusinesses, I say, the sooner you start trying to do something, the more you're going to learn about what it is you really can do. Thank you again so much. And Honorable, I'd be very honored to meet you and talk more about, what Tomato Joss is doing and how we might help you to shape your policies. It would be a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I must apologize because I didn't actually fully ask the question. The question was supposed to be, what key actions do you have for other stakeholders on the panel? So, but you've already spoken to your community, which is fantastic. I will now go to Mr. Kafiro and just ask, what 2 or 3 key actions do you have for the government or the private sector that would move us forward?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. No, thank you so much. I think for us as FAO and other UN partners, one of the things that we are advocating particularly is the transformation of food systems. And here urging our government here in Nigeria to work with us and all other stakeholders, especially in mainstreaming nutrition in its approaches to agriculture. because we talk a lot about increasing production. We talk less about consuming healthy diets from the agriculture that we actually undertake. This, of course, requires a lot of sensitization, and this goes also to all other stakeholders also in the room, for the need to sensitize the masses on the importance of growing but also consuming healthy diets, particularly prioritizing the children, because this is where the greatest need is. We don't want our children to be stunted or to waste away, but we can make a big change with regard to nutrition if indeed we combine nutrition messages and actions in our agriculture. But secondly, also for all of us, you recall when I was starting, I underlined the importance of multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approaches to this complex problem of food security and nutrition. And therefore, the push for partnerships for me here is very, very important, particularly with the private sector, with the financing institutions, with government at central and local levels, but also with the international communities to be able to, catalyze the investments that are needed in the sector. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much. And same question to Ndidi.
Thank you so much. So I'll build on where Fred stopped. My first action for the public sector is that we need a multi-sectorial task force set up at the federal level and at the state level in every state in Nigeria. This task force will involve the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Trade and Investment, Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Finance, Infrastructure, and Gender, because we cannot solve the problems in this sector if we work in silos. We have to come together and set streamlined policies, consistent policies, and also collect data. Everybody asks me, where can we find data at the federal level on the agriculture sector? We say, go to Nigerian National Bureau of Statistics. National Bureau of Statistics says, go somewhere else. We need a one-stop shop data center at the top. And this can be housed and managed by this task force at the federal level. And then we need to replicate a similar one at the state level. The second is that we have to close the gender gap in agriculture. There's a humongous gender gap when it comes to financing, when it comes to access to land, access to markets, access to resources. In terms of financing alone, women cannot access financing in the agriculture ecosystem and the food ecosystem, and we need to close this gender gap. We will solve so many problems in our society if we close the gender gap. And then the last one I would say is this issue of reforming and revamping agri-business education. We need talent for this sector. We need youth engaged in this sector. And we can only do it if we revamp the way that we teach about the food ecosystem, not only from the nutrition perspective, and Fred is right, but I would even suggest that we start teaching about food from primary school, secondary school, and university. Not agriculture or just in the field, but the food ecosystem. And private sector is ready to partner with you to revamp this curriculum. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to my distinguished panelists. And maybe if I can just try to close this house in about 30 seconds, considering that we're way behind on our time, but really rich conversations. I think it's really interesting to hear the depth of not just knowledge, but passion about food, about our food systems, and about how we move this forward as a country. And there are a lot of, if you like, keywords that have come out in our conversation today. I think, multi-stakeholder partnerships, critical. What we can do at the state level, critical. The investments that the federal government is putting in is substantial, but it needs to come together in a way that is more coordinated and supports the private sector at the point of production, but through the food system to ensure that we're not just producing, but we're getting those foods to people's plates. And also, as we look at production of foods, to think about healthy diets, what types of foods are we focusing on? How do we ensure that a lot of our investment is going not just into food production, but into the production and supporting nutritious foods through the food system? And finally, just to wrap up, I want to give the last, well, what I mean is I just wanted to echo the Honorable Minister's invitation to the private sector. And what that says to me is there's an openness to collaborate, there's an openness to understand the issues that are being faced by all the different sectors that are involved in our food system. And I really want to applaud the Honorable Minister first for joining, but also for extending that invitation for a much deeper conversation with the private sector, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, our panelists. Thank you, our audience. This has been a really rich conversation, and we have a few more to go. So please stay tuned to the 26th Nigerian Economic Summit of the NESG. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Ndidi, Mira, Fred, to hear your really rich perspectives. And I hope you found that as interesting and as useful as I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you.
All right.